Summer is supposed to be a time of fun, relaxation, and enjoying all sorts of events like going to the beach, going in parades and carnivals, and going on vacation. But for kids with sensory processing disorder, it can be a season full of stress and difficulty. In fact, for many families, this is when they first recognize the signs of sensory issues in their kids. Noticing that they're easily overwhelmed in big crowds with loud noises, can't handle transitions well, and struggle to stay calm and regulated, especially in the heat. Sadly, these sensory struggles aren't just for a few families here and there. Now, today, 1 in 6 kids have sensory processing disorder and have various challenges each and every day. Their nervous system struggles to filter and regulate normal input, leaving them in a constant state of sensory overload. Sadly, pediatricians often dismiss parents' concerns, saying that it's just a phase. But the truth is, early intervention is crucial for children with SPD to thrive. And even more importantly, those interventions must address the root cause of sensory processing disorder and not just recommend workarounds that may be helpful but not sustainable. This video is for parents who suspect that their child may have sensory processing disorder and want to understand the signs, causes, and available care options. We'll dive deep into all things sensory processing disorder and explore how the perfect storm of factors contribute to its development and how neurologically focused chiropractic care can help restore balance to your child's nervous system. Like we mentioned before, sensory processing disorder affects a staggering 1 in 6 children, with numbers continually rising. Despite the prevalence, SPD is frequently overlooked or misunderstood by healthcare providers. While it often co-occurs with autism spectrum disorder, they are distinct conditions. Children with sensory challenges may exhibit age-appropriate skills in some areas while struggling with pronounced sensory-based difficulties in others. Let's go through some of the most common signs of sensory processing disorder in kids. There's a bunch, so stay with me. Oversensitivity to touch, types of clothing, sounds, smells, lights, and trying new foods. These are all things that can be really overstimulating to kids with sensory processing disorder. It might lead to discomfort with certain textures of clothes, especially, or even foods, an avoidance of being touched, or distressed when clothing feels too tight and itchy, like they can't concentrate on anything else, as well as maybe covering their ears in response to normal sounds, not just really loud sounds. They might also fear loud noises like vacuum cleaners, sirens, alarms. It might send them into a state of fight or flight. Sometimes kids actually, instead of like avoiding these sensory inputs, they seek them out. So they call them seeking sensory input. And that's where they constantly want to touch things, or they seek strong tactile sensations. Those are the kids that really like weighted blankets. So they like that extra sensation of being touched, or they like to engage in rough play a lot as well. As opposed to that, there are the avoiding sensory input, and that's where you're going to get a lot of those sensitivities, but they avoid activities that involve physical contact, such as hugging, maybe, or even they get distressed by activities like haircuts and teeth brushing because all of that sensory input really bothers them. Some kids might also have difficulty with fine motor skills, challenging tasks like buttoning clothes or using utensils like forks and spoons, or even writing with a pen. And this can translate into gross motor skills as well. So some kids might have difficulty with big activities like running, jumping, riding a bike. They might seem almost clumsy. It seems like they're uncoordinated. And that goes into balance and coordination issues. So if you see them frequently tripping, falling, or appearing clumsy, it's not just because they are clumsy. It's because their nervous system's having a hard time figuring out where they are in space. This also leads into poor body or spatial awareness. That is difficulty knowing where their body is in space. And that leads to them maybe bumping into things or people a lot, which can make them really overwhelmed in crowded places. This is another factor that we see a lot. They can get really distressed or anxious when they're in a very crowded environment, like malls, parks, parties, places that you normally would go to, and places that maybe you don't feel are very crowded. If there's more than a couple of people in a big space, they might feel like those people are super close to them when they really aren't. Another one is difficulty transitioning between activities. Now, we see this a lot with toddlers, and that's totally normal in that stage. But as we grow older, we should be able to become better at transitioning to something that we maybe don't want to do, leaving something that we do want to do. But you're going to notice meltdowns or anxiety when changing from one activity to another or moving between different environments. So even if they're doing the same activity, but they need to move into a different room to do it. This can cause another factor, which is emotional outbursts. These are the frequent tantrums or meltdowns in response to this sensory overload and frustration. They just are feeling a lot more than we can see physically, and that's causing their bucket to just completely spill over, and you see those emotional outbursts. You even hear kids say a lot like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to feel this way, I don't want to act this way, but I just can't help it. Another thing is having a difficult time self-calming. So they struggle to really soothe themselves when they're upset. They often need external help to calm down. And this isn't because as a baby you didn't let them self-soothe in the crib. Honestly, that doesn't have any bearing on this. But it's more often that even suggestions or strategies that you give them to help them learn how to calm down their emotions when they do get overwhelmed, they still can't use them, or it doesn't help them really calm down. Another factor is hyperactivity or inactivity. So either end of the spectrum there, being excessively active or excessively lethargic, depending on the sensory input that they seek or avoid. They can also have difficulty sleeping, meaning either trouble falling asleep or staying asleep because of these sensory sensitivities. So maybe it's their clothing or their bed, or they're thinking about all the things that happened that day and they're getting really overwhelmed. One other thing is poor attention span. So difficulty focusing on tasks, easily distracted by sensory stimuli. That's when a kid might be doing their homework, and if their siblings in another room, maybe watching a TV show or listening, they can't focus on what they're doing. And it's not that they're right next to them, bothering them, because that happens a lot too. But it's far enough away where they should be able to stay on task. And the last thing that we really see is repetitive behaviors. So engaging in these repetitive motions or actions as a way to self-soothe or manage the sensory input. Sometimes when you think of it in an autism spectrum disorder, they'll call this stimming. So it's a repeated action. Sometimes it's with hands, sometimes it's with feet, and it can be anything, but they do this to help calm down. So what is really going on with the nervous system in sensory processing disorder? It's a 3-part process. First, a sensory input comes in through the sensory nerves and sensory aspect of the spinal cord. We all know what these senses are, right? Seeing, touching, hearing, tasting, all of those sensory inputs is how our body gets information about the environment. Our body then reads this information from both inside of us and external environment. So it's not just anything outside, but we also have those sensory things inside our body, so our body knows what's going on inside. The second part is that the brain and central nervous system have to process or interpret all of this information and determine what is important, what they need to pay attention to, and what they need to react to, and then what is not important and should be silenced or filtered out and essentially ignored. So if there's a tiger in front of you, your body says, I really need to pay attention to this tiger, not that the grass is itchy underneath my feet. So that's where we want to see those differences in filters. And the third part of this is that the brain and nervous system then send information and what are called actions or impulses out the various parts of the brain and body to react and respond to the incoming sensory input. So we have sensory input coming in, our brain has to decide what's important, and then we have sensory action input coming out to help us react to those sensory inputs. When the sensory nerve pathways into the brain and the nervous system are altered and interfered with, then the brain and nervous system receive bad information, and in turn, that leads to poor decision making or interpretation, and finally, bad or inappropriate actions and outputs as a result of this bad information and improper processing or interpretation of this sensory information. The take-home point here is that it's a neurosensory communication and connection problem that's called subluxation or nervous system dysregulation. Once you understand subluxation and nervous system dysregulation, then you as parents can truly understand what the root cause of SPD is. Why are sensory issues and subluxation so hard to find and make sense of? First off, traditional pediatricians and medical doctors do not have a good understanding of SPD and neurosensory function as a whole. Second, no traditional medical testing or even movement-based therapies like PT and OT know how to find and detect subluxation and nervous system dysregulation in this way. So while the root cause of sensory processing disorder may escape most common medical diagnostic testing, our neurological insight scans are literally designed to find subluxation, nervous system dysregulation and dysfunction, and help parents see with their own eyes exactly what's causing their child's frequent tantrums, meltdowns, and sensory difficulties. If you feel like you've tried everything already, you've done months or even years of OT and made all sorts of sensory workarounds part of your normal everyday life, and you just want things to be easier and less modified for your child and family, you need to learn more about how exactly neurologically focused chiropractic care works. This specialized form of chiropractic care, like we provide here at Generations Chiropractic, can do so much for kids struggling with sensory issues. Let's help your child and whole family get back to an easier, calmer, more consistent quality of life with chiropractic care. To learn more or schedule an appointment, simply visit the link in our Instagram bio and leave us a comment or send us a DM to get connected with one of our care advocates right away.